I would like to welcome you to the PRRS session today, and I can see for the attendance that there is a lot of interest, so that's good. I hope you didn't come with the expectation that we would have all the answers or solutions. So I would just want to set that as the stage, because we want to share a lot of information, but we also want to learn about you, because this is a panel discussion. So, my name is Montserrat Torremorell. I'm a faculty at the University of Minnesota. I teach and I do research in different areas, and one of them is PRRS and influenza, try to understand the disease with the goal to help control the diseases and then hopefully get rid of them, right? So today, what we would like to do today, talk about PRRS. Okay, we know that this last year, in particular, PRRS has been very challenging with some of the new viruses. We know PRRS. It seems like every year is very challenging, but this last year, in particular, with the 144 virus, it certainly brought the challenges to a new dimension. But we also think because of that, there's been new opportunities, because it gave us an opportunity to take a fresh look at PRRS once again. So we want to have a discussion about PRRS, how the industry's seen it, how some of our panelists that I will go ahead and introduce in just a second, they've seen it in their systems, and what are they doing to control PRRS, and what are they learning, okay, whether they've made changes, and again, share that with all of you. So what we will do first, I will introduce the panelists, and then each of them will take the stage and will present a couple of slides to tell you about how they've seen the PRRS in their systems and what they've done. And then after that will be a discussion. And we hope all of you engage in these discussions, being part of asking questions or even just comments. Okay? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the introductions. The first panelist is Todd Marotz. Todd comes from Wakefield Pork, where he is the head of production and has direct responsibilities on production, genetics, facility design, and overall construction of the farms at the system. He comes from Nebraska, I understand, Todd, where he was raised on a diversified crop and livestock farm. He has a degree, production ag degree from the University of Nebraska, School of Technical Agriculture, and also a BS on animal science. So thank you, Todd, for being with us. Our next, I will go ahead and introduce the three panelists at once. That way we can just help with the flow after the introductions. So the second panelist will be Dr. Karyn Havas. Dr. Havas comes from the Pipestone research system. She is the Transboundary Animal Disease Research Director, and she's been at Pipestone since 2019. She is also a Senior Research Associate at the Cornell University. Before that, she was Diagnostic Services Section Head at the Plum Island Lab for Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory. So a lot of experience on foreign animal disease. And it's very nice to see that she has also interest on endemic diseases like PRRS. So that's very nice. So before that, she also has a degree, or she's a public health veterinarian. She's been in the Army for 10 years, I understand, and her training is on epidemiology and economy. So from the University of Cornell University, that's where she got her DVM degree, then a PhD in epidemiology at Colorado State University, and a master's in applied economics at Purdue University. So thank you, Karyn, for joining us. And the last presenter that we will have with us is Dr. Aaron Lower, who is president and partner at the Carthage Veterinary Service. So he comes from Illinois, although I understand he's based in Champaign, Illinois. where he sees most of his clients in the eastern Corn Belt. So it will be very nice to get another perspective outside the Midwest. So it will be nice to see that. Dr. Lower, he has a DVM degree from the University of Illinois. He graduated in 2009. And before that, also from the University of Illinois, he had a degree on animal science. And his work at the Carthage Veterinary Services since graduation in 2009. So welcome, the three of you. Thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to your presentations. So with that, we'll move to the next presenter. Todd, the floor is yours, and you can use this.
Okay. Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? I do a little better walking around versus standing at a podium. But we were talking a little bit before the panel. This is the hardest and the easiest discussion to have. It's the easiest because there's no right or wrong answers. It's the hardest because in 1990, we called it mystery pig disease, and we still do. And so we're still trying to figure it out. We're still trying to get over the struggles and try and understand it a little bit more, and I think we do. And so as we're going through, I got a few slides I wanted to show of kind of our experience here at Wakefield Pork. We have farms up in this area, Nicollet down to the Amboy area, and we've had our fair share. And so I wanted to share some of that with you and our experiences. But, our philosophy, early on, we're pretty methodical, when it comes to PRRS. First we want to obviously validate the infection. We want to make sure we monitor the clinical signs. In the past it's either you will have aborted sows or they don't abort, but you have piglet losses. And so there's different strategies with each of those. We definitely want to provide support to the employees on the farm. A lot of the farms we had this year hadn't broke for 8+ years. There's a number of them that have never seen PRRS before, and it can be very devastating, especially with the 144. And then you move those pigs into the grow finish, and that isn't any easier. So it's about providing support, making sure there's understanding, making sure we're all in this together, and to keep reiterating that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. It will get better. No matter how bad it is, when you're in the middle of it, trust me, it will get better, one way or the other. The main thing, I think, is to stabilize the herd, to get the herd stable as quickly as possible, hopefully through some form of natural exposure. We don't go right for serum right away. We like to get the herd kind of feeling comfortable before we do that. And then it's developing a strategy to get to negative. At the end of the day, we want to produce negative pigs. We feel strongly that we can gain our genetic advantage that we have with the genetics we have only if we have the health that's stable behind it. And so that's always our goal. Now, whether that be through a closure, whether we depop it, and those are tough decisions, especially with $100 wean pigs right now. Is there a place to use vaccine? Or do you help mitigate some of the loss with an off-site breed project, which produces its own set of challenges? So it's a little small to read maybe as we're going through, but I'll do the best we can. So these are the farms that we broke with PRRS. Starting in October of 2020, the first two farms we had were non-filtered. Most of the farms we have are filtered. We're probably 92% of our total sow farms are filtered. We have 58,000 sows currently. And then we went from October to November to December, and then we had a little bit of break. We thought maybe it was behind us. Then we had another rash in the spring of some breaks. And some of the messaging that we have on there is really some terms that we use internally. Negative, for our definition of negative, once it breaks with a PRRS, we need to have 3 negative monthly blood tests in a row on piglets for us to classify that farm as negative, to then bring in a naive negative gilt back into that herd. So that's what that means. Dormant, on the other hand, is we've had a negative test, but not necessarily 3 in a row. So that tells us we're on the right track. We're making negative pigs. The sow farm itself, the herd is stable, but we've had some challenges, like a lot of people, about trying to push that PRRS virus out of farrowing, potentially. and to keep consistently making negative pigs. So that's kind of the things that we've been dealing with. You can see the different strains that we've been dealing with, predominantly a 144 or a 142, and not going to get into all the differences of the 144 and all that kind of stuff, but wanted to kind of show you kind of the things that we were dealing with as we were going through the PRRS season and some of the challenges, obviously, it's been presenting, as I'm sure a lot of you in this room are gone through the same thing. When we were talking about challenges, it kind of lent into, so I just picked 3 farms. These farms broke within 3 weeks from each other, similar viruses as we were going through, but acted very differently. And so from an abortion standpoint, you can see that one farm had tremendous amount of abortions, but the other 2, not nearly as bad. You go through pig losses, total number of pig losses. This has been a kicker, is that farm that had all the abortions also had an awful lot of dead sows. And if you want to get morale down in a hurry, start dragging out a bunch of dead sows that are 500 pounds that are at the time of farrowing. So we actually had to incorporate where we terminated some pregnancies to help reduce the amount of sow death loss in order to do it. And that was a very tough decision. But at the end of the day, the farm staff would say that's the best thing you could have done. We saved sows, we cleaned it up, the pigs started looking better after that, and we would do that again. So it's just another strategy that we'd never had to do before. That, under the circumstance, it just made the most sense. Nursery pig loss, and that's the thing, we have some grow finish people in here, and, the sow farm starts feeling better, the herd's getting stabilized, we got some pigs we can work with and keep them alive. But the nurseries, now you have 25% of them die. Or they seroconvert and they have PRRS issues. And so it's a long, long tail that comes off this 144, which just as soon as the sow farms start feeling better about themselves, the nurseries are now a problem. And you got to push it out of there. So we're all in this together. So total pig losses, the way we kind of evaluate some of these strains, where you have farm A that lost 18 weeks of production. That's 18 weeks weaning 0 pigs, basically. The other farm, Farm B, was exactly the same, but a very different way of getting there. They didn't have the aborts, they didn't have dead sows, but they had massive losses of wean pigs. And then Farm C, which we would classify, unfortunately, as a normal kind of PRRS break, acted much different. Kind of went through it pretty easily. One of the differences we saw with Farm C, though, is that it had a PRRS break a year ago, a different strain, and so we probably received some cross protection to the 144, potentially. We also have a farm that uses vaccine that was exposed to a 144. Wasn't as big of a deal there either. So there is some cross protection with some of these strains, but they are very devastating, especially on the farm. And so I'm sure as we'll get into this, we'll kind of work through some other topics and questions along the way, but just wanted to share some of our experiences with you. And I appreciate the ownership of Wakefield to allow me to share this with you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, no, I'll need that. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity today to come talk to you. Always happy to come and talk to producers and those who are working with pigs. We learn a lot. I learn, in particular, a lot from our discussion, so I'm really looking forward to this panel discussion. So I'll talk to you a little bit about our experience at Pipestone and in our system. So I'll dive right in. Nope, wrong way. There we go. So I kind of boiled it down to some words, right? So there's not any graphics here, but basically we had clinical findings from January 2019 through November of just this past year that we looked at. So our first case was really in January 2019 with the 144-1C variant. And we continued, well, I think our last case that I know of that I have documentation of and data for right now is in December. So what I'm going to talk about here is through November. So during this time frame, we had 25 sow farms break. Okay? And most of these were clustered with the 144.1c variant, 6 to 7. 6 to 7 of these were clustered with the 144.1c variant, not 67. Okay, so just to put that math in place. What we saw with this when we looked at the data, and we didn't just look at the data for the 144.1c, we compared it to the other PRRS variants. And we did see that you saw increased abortions, increased mummies, which just verified what everybody was saying, right? We also saw that downstream in the nurseries you had higher mortality. So verified experiences in the field recognized that it was a more severe strain. We did note that our vaccinated farms, or farms that were stable but vaccinated, they had lesser pre-wean mortality. Okay? So even though they were vaccinated and we were using the modified live, when they got infected, they did better than our farms that did not use a vaccine. So good thing to note. Our South, the biggest challenge we're faced with now, so now that we're past November, is we start to do these closures, right? Like you stabilize the farm, you try to close the farm to allow for the process to become a negative farm. Well, we're having a hard time doing that, a really hard time doing that. In fact, our normal success rate's around 90%, and our success rate this past year so far is around 50%. So it's a huge investment to stabilize a farm, to close it out, and failures there aren't a win for anyone. So we're trying to figure out why right now. Why is the 144.1c harder to stabilize? And at this point, we don't have questions, but we are working on it. Or we don't have answers. We have lots and lots of questions, but we are working on it. So it is a unique virus in that sense, is in that our protocols that have worked for a number of years are proving to be more challenging this year. So we did a lot of research, right? Like, so I'm in Pipestone research. That's what we do. And in doing that research, we found a few things. So this 144.1c is bad. No one's going to take that away. It's a bad virus. But it's not worse than a previous 174. I think this 174, I tried to check with Dr. Scott D., what year it was from, and he's like, oh, it's one of my historical 174s. I think it's from 2015. Okay, so compared to the 2015 174 variant in a lab, right, in our barn, that we treat like a lab, it was about the same in terms of clinical presentation. So we have seen this before. The unique thing about this one is that it was a summer, right? We saw it off season, and now it's starting to feel long. But we've dealt with this before, and I think it's important that we remember we've dealt with this before. And some of the things we've learned from our feed studies, and particularly the feed studies that Scott D's worked on, and we've recently published a lot of that data in this Transboundary and Emerging Diseases special issue, is that feed is a problem. PRRS transports and feed. So we continue to do this work, and we continue to learn that biosecurity works. Biosecurity works. Changing your boots, having a clean, dirty line, showering in, all of a really good biosecurity program is still going to help you, and is still worth investing in, and is still worth auditing, and is still worth making sure that you spend time on every day, because in a lab where we can control it and make sure people do the processes that we want them to do because we're treating it like a research experiment, it works. And when I say a lab, it's a barn that we treat like a lab. Okay? So we know that this 144.1c variant, we can still deal with it with the tools we have. And then when we add on the fact that we looked at our infected farms to our uninfected farms in general, right? So in general, not just 144.1c, because about 6 to 7 of our farms broke with 144.1c and 25 broke overall. So we had other variants floating around. We had other issues this year than 144.1c, even though that was a pretty bad one. So when you look at all the PRRS infected farms against the uninfected farms, we validated what we found in experiments. Filtration works. Feed mitigation works. And when you put those two together, they're synergistic. They work really well. And on top of that, where you are really matters. So if you are in a swine-dense region, you just have to do things really, really with clear authority and clear delineation of these are what we need to do to keep ourselves safe in our biosecurity practices. There's not as much wiggle room when you live in a swine-dense area or you have a site in a swine-dense area. And we've known this. So fortunately, this behaves similarly to what we've seen before. And hopefully that gives us some comfort. It's been a rough year. And now we just have to bring up our standards or review our protocols or audit our systems and make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do. Because I think sometimes that's a challenge, right? I think for everyone we can acknowledge there's always room to improve in these areas. The last thing we learned is, to do this, I did something that was statistical, right? I'm not going to go through the statistics because I often get booed off the stage when I do that. But basically, the vaccines were not statistically significant. So we just confirmed that vaccines still don't protect against infection, right? So if you're a farm that vaccinates versus doesn't, you're not protecting against infection. But remember, the vaccinated farm had lesser pre-wean mortality. So it's a way to bring your animals to a naive state to use vaccines. It's a part of that process to get to the negative herd, to get to your healthiest herd. But not being vaccinated or being vaccinated has no difference in terms of becoming infected. The difference is once you get infected. So once you're infected, the vaccinated farms actually had less pre-wean mortality. And it probably has something to do with immunological memory, right? Like what you've been exposed to. No one likes to be completely naive to anything, right? So neither do pigs. And I think that's it.
Well, before they asked somebody from Illinois to come speak, they should have probably asked if we had any 1441C yet, and we haven't had any yet. So I'll probably get booed off the stage right away. But hopefully, the perspective from another section of the country, and as you move farther east, will be good. And it's actually it's a little bit predictable. So you guys, we saw this back in 2013, 2014 with 174. You guys were talking about the tremendous losses that you had with regard to this new virus. It took about 2 years for it to show up in the other parts of the Midwest. I would expect that we had our first client break with it here in Missouri about 2 months ago. In our neck of the world, we always get through fall really pretty well, and we get into about March 1st, and think that we're pretty smart with regard to PRRS and biosecurity and managing that. And then March, April, and now into May, I think that's one of the changes here, as you guys have seen, is that we keep getting into warmer season weather, and we still have that risk. So we get into March, April, May, I would expect that we'll get to start to see and get some of our taste of the 144 virus, and then as we get into the next 2 years, as we move into Illinois, Indiana, et cetera, I'm sure we'll get plenty of experience from you guys, or that you guys are already taken through the School of Hard Knocks here the last 2 years. So geographically, there is that change, but we still are going through a lot of the same heartaches with you guys that you guys are experienced with PRRS, as far as break rates and the long duration of shedding within sow farms. I've got 2 slides here with just kind of our observations and thoughts. This data set continues to be really powerful. It's probably one of the most read weekly commentaries or things that come out of the swine industry. And if you think about it, I mean, if you look back and say, well, we've accumulated a huge data set now from 2009 until now, so we're into 13 years of this. And I think there's a couple important take-homes of how this virus has changed over the years. There was the comment by Todd earlier about, this virus has been around 30 years. That virus has changed a lot over the last 30 years. And honestly, if you look at data like this and the progress we've made, it's probably difficult to use the word progress with regard to how we're managing PRRS. A couple things that I think are important as we kind of just see what is the virus doing and changing. Part of that is just that section of green continues to shrink. So we've got less of the industry that is truly naive, stage 4. We've got more of the industry that has some sort of antibodies to virus. So it continues to indicate that we continue to see decent transmission of the virus. I guess we can't really point a whole lot, but the virus used to be very seasonal. In 2012, 2013, we've seen that shift in that we don't see the big seasonal increase in the fall, or maybe it's more that we don't see the decrease and that we're cleaning up herds, and that's probably a bigger driver of that. But we used to break a lot of herds every fall, winter. We clean them all up all in the summer, and then we do the same thing again. But you can see that there's really not the peaks of that, and that's probably driven by that next bullet point with regard to the persistence. Our ability to get the virus out in 30 weeks is almost a miracle anymore. It's more like 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 weeks in order to get the virus back out of the herd. I think the last bullet point there is the viremia of the virus is also one of the things that's probably changed, and I think explains some of this. So if you do, as we send in piglet serum for PRRS out of your farm that's broke, and you do a quantitative PCR, they'll give you a rough idea how much virus is in that sample. There's a lot of those that, as you're sending them in, have got over 1 billion virus particles per cc of serum that you send in. So as you think about the replication rate of the virus, that continues to increase. You've got big farms, tons of replication, billions and billions and billions of viruses. That's probably some of the math of why this virus seems to maybe move a little easier, transmit easier in the air, and then persist within sow herds. The persistence in the sow herds has been frustrating, and I'm sure that'll come up as part of the question. So I wanted to highlight that a little bit as we think about how do we handle PRRS in sow herds. To me, there's really kind of two things on what's the change from the 30 weeks closure to the 60 weeks. And I think that it's probably within two of these buckets is what most people believe. One is that there's a population of that sow herd that's persistent shedders, and they just continue to shed virus past that 30-week time period. That's made us ask questions about, are we getting everybody exposed? Does it need to be a natural exposure, modified live virus only, or LVI? Do I inject that? Do I spray that? What's the timing of that? Do I do it one time? Do I do it multiple times? So we continue to have a lot of, I would say, experimentation in the vet industry of what the right thing is there, and I don't know if we've really landed on what the correct thing is to do. On the immunity side, use of killed vaccines, modified live vaccines, we've got plenty of those on the market now. And then there's some, if you notice, every nutrition company has become nutrition and animal health, and most of those are on this immune stimulation and supporting the immune system side of things. So we've got some of those tools there that I don't know if we've found any that are really great with regard to stopping the persistent shedding. The last part of the persistent shedding side of it would be that on the diagnostic side, and especially processing fluids and taking huge samples of huge volumes of samples from farms, we've been able to identify the virus persistently in those herds longer. The second kind of side of it with regard to why are the farms shedding virus longer is a bit more on this, and I'm not sure what the right term is to use. Monty, you can probably correct me, but quasi-species I think is a reasonable term in that you have the initial infection within the herd, and maybe that herd got infected with more than really one virus. And then as you've got these billions and billions and billions of replications of an RNA virus that has to go through two steps in order to replicate, you get lots of mutation. And so that herd and that animal got exposed to an initial virus, but then the next week, the next month, it may get exposed to another virus that's quite similar to the original, but the immune system's maybe there's a short-term period of viremia and the immune system has to ramp up against it. And so some of this persistence of shedding within the sow herd may be because your animals are getting infected with multiple viruses for a long period of time. And so as what we've seen is that, on the diagnostic side, OR5 may not tell us the whole thing. We may need to get into the whole genome sequencing, and then we don't really know what that tells us. It's also made us change maybe a little bit on how we think about homogenizing herds, loading, and then the timing closure. One of the changes, that I'll talk about here later as we get into questions, but would be that I generally won't close a herd until the herd tells me to close it. So we break with it. We may continue to enter gilts and LVIM and MLVM until the herd gets into that low prevalence before we need to close the herd, which may be 30, 40, 50 weeks after the break. I think also with regard to the long-term shedding and whatnot, makes you question what's the value of McRevel and some of those procedures and when should you put them in. It seems like a normal break anymore would be that you have a break and you watch those processing fluids and they start to go relatively quiet to negative. It seems like most herds will have a flare-up somewhere 30 to 40 or 20 to 40 weeks after the break, and that you'll start to see processing fluids positive with or without clinical signs, and then those farms will go negative. But when a client asks me kind of, hey, we broke with PRRS, when am I going to have a negative herd again, or when will I have gotten rid of wild-type virus, I tell them on average it's probably going to be about 60 weeks in order to get there.
Okay, so we're going to move to the part of the session that it's going to be more about questions and discussion. So I will start with the first question, but please, and then I will welcome questions from the audience as well. And since we were talking about PRRS control and herd closure, I would like the panel to talk a little bit about when we say that some of these herd closures don't work, okay? Or we think it's taking longer to actually to get to elimination. I would like for you to elaborate about the protocols that you use during that herd closure. Are we just following the same rule, or are you changing the way how you look at herd closures in terms of how you monitor them? I mean, Aaron, you alluded to the fact that you don't start herd closure until you have a sign that the herd has already been stable. So if maybe we start with you to talk more about that, and then for the rest also to comment.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's the right strategy, but it's been really difficult to predict if a herd is going to flare up and how long that herd's going to be. And generally after a break, as you get into that 20 to 30 weeks after the break, you're at pretty full production and weaned pigs are doing quite well. And so that's where as you look at that, I generally will delay and make sure that I've got enough gilt supply, because it depends on, what's your goal? Is it really wean pig output, or is it getting back to negative, in that speed? So it depends on the producer a little bit, but that's generally been my strategy, is in that I don't know how to predict if that herd's going to flare up and how long it's going to shed. And I don't know of the intervention side of it exactly what's key. But if I keep flowing gilts in there, at least I know I'm going to make pigs. What has changed, I think, a bit, and what you guys have experienced here with this 144-1C, is that 20 to 30 weeks was generally pretty good production and pretty good downstream production. I think that's what's changing a little bit, is that these pigs in the nursery at 30, 40, 50 weeks with some of these new strains have continued to suck, and you guys have probably had a little more experience with that.
Yeah, I'll comment. So, herd closures require a stable state to start, and normally we've gotten there, we've gotten to a stable state, we've gone through our procedures, which includes vaccination, and then what we're seeing this year is about 20 weeks later or so. I think that's the correct timeline. Not only just poor piglet health, but even poor sow health has popped up this year, and that's like, you kind of have to restart, right? Like, you no longer have a stable state, and you have to kind of restart your cycle and try again. And that's been our real challenge this past year, is trying to figure out why that's happening. And it's not consistent, but that's the question we're trying to solve right now. And it's particularly with our 144-1C farms.
Yeah, we would be very similar on the timelines. I think we would pay very much attention to the pig quality. Let the pigs tell us kind of how they're progressing, and that kind of starts when we start maybe doing some processing fluid. We may start doing a processing fluid at 12 weeks after a break if we think we're making some progress. Typically, it's more like 16 to 20 weeks, before we feel comfortable enough. But you got to get a starting point, right? You got to figure out, are you 6 for 6 positive? Are you 1 out of 6 positive? Is it the older pigs that are positive? Are the pigs born being positive? To kind of give you a benchmark of where are you. And then you can kind of go from there. And so we've, hopefully everything works through and you get your 3 negative tests. And yeah, the processing fluids is a great tool. It can get a little frustrating at times to try and get consistent negatives without maybe some environmental contamination or whatever the case may be, but we use blood on the piglets to kind of make that determination. 3 months in a row, negative piglets, then we'll bring negative gilts back into the herd. We have made decisions if we're getting downstream infections of the nursery pigs and higher mortalities, we can't get the farrowing stabilized. We have reloaded the farm with gilts and reshot the farm with mixed results. You do the best you can. It matches up very closely. You try and get as much natural exposure as you possibly can, but you can't let it not go. You have to get it negative, in our opinion. We commingle flows. We need to get negative status for the employees, for the growers, for the system, all the way down. And so we've had to make some of those decisions. Yes.
This discussion reminds me a little bit to have to reflect about the history of PRRS elimination. When we started some of these projects 20 years ago, we actually did that more. The closure came after the herd had been stable, right? And at that time we were just using the flow of gills that had been naturally immunized because that's where the infection was happening. And then as an industry went the other way, right? The infection right away after an outbreak, and then closing at that time when the infection is the highest, with the idea that get everybody positive, try to shorten the closure period, but doesn't seem to be the case. And now maybe we do need to go back to some of those original protocols. So that's a very interesting observation. Questions by the audience? Does anybody have any comment, any question? I have another question for the panel. I hope some of the shy ones in the audience can feel more at home and ask questions as well. But Karyn, I have one question for you. You showed the data in which you had a percentage, a significant number of farms, 25 farms that they broke in a relatively short period of time. And obviously, at your system, you do a lot of things on biosecurity, and you stay on top of the biosecurity. So I would like to get more of your thoughts about why is that? I mean, that high level of infection, is it just because regionally there is a higher dose of infection, you think? Or is it something else went wrong?
Well, so the sow farms are under our management, and so the systems are very similar throughout, right? So the systems throughout all the sow farms are pretty similar, and we saw more break, a higher percentage break this year than ever before. So we really were surprised at some of the farms that broke. Many had not broken a number of years. So, as an epidemiologist, you're like, okay, host, agent, environment, right? Like those are your three options of what's changed. The farms didn't change, the biosecurity didn't change. We continue to audit, we continue to implement those practices, but of course there's always likely room for error. My personal theory is that, particularly based on the CT values and some of the titers that we've gotten off these pigs, is that they're making a lot of virus. They're making an incredible amount of virus with this particular variant. So when you have that, you kind of change the game, right? Like it's easy if I'm playing tennis, I can hit one ball at a time, but if you throw 1,000 balls at me, I'm going to hit like 2, maybe, right? I'm a really bad tennis player, but I might hit 2 if you throw 1,000 at me. But that means 9,998 just went right by me. And that's a concentration issue. So in some of our studies, we saw that swine-dense areas, it was really hard to be successful with PRRS this year. So why is that? Well, when you're swine-dense and your swine are machines for making virus, and they make a lot of virus, even when you do all the other things right, you have feed mitigants, you're scoring high in biosecurity scores, you're using filtration, you still had a higher odds of breaking than not. So to me that says that there was something about the contamination of the area that was just unusual this year. So that would be my personal theory. I'd have to back it up with some science, but.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, just I think was it Iowa State published a study last week or whatever that did compare the new 144 versus the others, and I think that was one of their conclusions is that virus replicated more efficiently or to a higher level than some of the older viruses. So it fits with some of that discussion.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting point about biosecurity. And, there is something different with this virus and the amount of shedding and the amount of virus that we're subjected to. But, as we went through and, we work with Dr. Paul in the Swine Vet Center, and, we had third-party audits done. We stepped up biosecurity, because we have common mills feeding different sow farms, and so we swabbed truck washes, we swabbed feed trucks, we went looking for it basically to see if we could find it. We did internal investigations. Really not a lot of, there wasn't, I would say, a smoking gun necessarily that, boy, this is what caused it. But if anything, I think it helped the system with raising the awareness. Everybody got engaged. Everybody knew that this was bad, we don't want it, keep it away. And so especially when you got multiplication farms, you got boar stud, the world shuts down. You are not getting a visitor. You are not getting repairs done. You are not having anybody new until we get this figured out and feel better about stuff. So it's really about, to me, circling the wagons, doing the best you can, getting the awareness up. And, one of the things with the third-party investigations, it was pretty ominous, to come in. You had somebody from Iowa State, somebody from the U of M, somebody from PIC, and you got this big group coming to go look at your farm. And the messaging to the farm was, look, this is not a witch hunt. Nobody did anything wrong. This is about making the system better. See if we can find something that we can do differently. And that was the entire messaging. And we did. You put a lot of scrutiny on, how's your wean pig area? Where do your deads come, your mortality come out? How do your gilts come in? The high traffic areas that touch potentially outside, how are those things being managed? The skid loader, the compost, all those things are now under scrutiny, and you end up with a book of all the audit stuff to kind of go through. But again, it's a heightening awareness, and it goes back to biosecurity and the farm broke. But what can you do? It's not about what happened or what can't you do anymore. What can you do? And to me, that makes the whole system better.
Questions or comments? Some of you that have hands-on experience with PRRS, recent experience. Anybody would like to comment?
I'll get things started, Montserrat.
Very good. Thank you.
So I think one of the comments, I would agree with a lot of the comments that have been said. Some of the farms that we have had that went through, we were able to get those to come negative. And so some of the herds are performing like we historically would have expected. So there's always been a variation when we look at the viruses, and this one's probably not different. There's going to be some that take longer, some that go shorter. But my question was more for the panel on one of the things I think with this particular virus is the impact on the grow finish, and the impact on the grow finish when we had negative pigs placed out in areas and they turned positive. It seemed like this virus hit harder than other viruses in the grow finish phase when we had these breaks, and tended to move in areas pretty distinctly within an area. It didn't take very long for the neighborhood to turn positive. So just wondering on some comments there.
Who would like to go first? Please, Aaron.
Well, I mean, we haven't had this virus in the area yet, so I don't know if I can comment much on it. I do think that, I mean, this is Aaron's gut, but I mean, in Illinois, right, we're a little better spaced out, and so we might break farms once every 3 to 7 years or something like that. But I believe that a lot of the movement of the virus ends up being aerosol, and I think it's 80-90% of the virus movement. And I think that when we have a virus in an area and then we break farms that are around there, even if they're 3 to 8 miles away, and we're worried about the feed truck or the movement of the vets or whatever it is, right? There's a lot of different farms that all have those contact points, but it's generally the farms that are close with a similar area virus, and so that's where I kind of say, I think I think the viruses continue to. We've done a great job on biosecurity, right? All of those things. What's the virus that can survive anymore? It's the one that can aerosolize and move. And so I may give it too much credit, but I do think that continues to be the major movement.
Yeah, we did. It's not because of sample size. It wasn't statistically relevant, but it was remarkable the higher rate of mortality in the 144 infected farms compared to the other PRRS infected farms. And biosecurity, I think we all know, is highest in our sow farms, and it's not quite as high in our grow finish. And aerosolization is a major issue. And I think that's a question, we have to ask ourselves is, what can we do to enhance biosecurity in our grow finish sites? Is there anything we can do? And filtering them is, like, economically almost out of the question, I believe. And that will remain a challenge if you're in a swine dense area. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any grand solution for it, but we did find in our studies that, feed mitigation really, really helps as well. So some of the things we're doing to manage threats of all kinds, like be it a foreign animal disease prep or a PRRS or whatever it is, this is our greatest weakness, right? The grow finish sites, they're our greatest weakness in terms of biosecurity. So what we do there, we need to do really well. But the aerosol problem is a density problem, absolutely. So I don't think there's an easy solution for that, but I do think that with respiratory diseases like PRRS, it's not an easy problem to solve.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's vast differences in biosecurity basically on a sow farm. We use mitigation in the feed. It's shower in. It's all these procedures that are coming into place. Grow finish is a little bit, obviously different, especially with the use of rendering. I think rendering poses another touch. The animals on a rendering truck are not the healthiest animals. They're the ones that turn into mortality, so obviously they're carrying the most disease, and they're the ones that come by your place the more often and go to all your neighbors. And you don't know the status of your neighbors. You don't know, and nor do you have control over that. But I think that does play a role potentially down the road with some PRRS, trying to handle that. And we encourage, try and work with our neighbors as best we can. We designate some sensitive areas, whether that's next to a sow farm, a boar stud, whether it's ours or somebody else's. We look at the pigs, a sow farm broke, but chances are it probably already weaned some pigs that are positive before we found it. Where did those pigs go? Do we need to move them? Or where did those get placed? What can we do with those? Are we putting somebody else at risk? And so I think it's collectively everybody in this room understands that it's all of our problems. And taking it down the road, that helps you, but not necessarily maybe somebody else. And I think there can be more coordination, collaboration with, producers and, vets and all that kind of thing to help with this disease.
Now, I think the discussion is interesting, right, on what can we do on the grow finish that it's doable and that it's still cost effective. But maybe that's where we have to be looking at, right? And even just to do some of those basic biosecurity protocols that we know work, how easy is to implement them in the grow finish? Because it's not just PRRS, right? It's any disease. That's where 80-90% of the pigs are in the grow finish from weaning to market, and we don't do as much of a good biosecurity compared to sow farms, and it's probably where the opportunities are. So that leads me to the next question is, we want to hear from you more questions, but if you could just say three things, each of you, about what are you doing different this year for PRRS control, and maybe even specific to grow finish, what would those be? I mean, like 2-3 things that you have done as a result of what you saw this last year. What are you doing differently? But specific actions.
I'll get started. I think I touched on a little bit about heightening the awareness. One of the things we are doing more of is checking truck washes and potentially some feed mills with some swabbing periodically. I think anytime you go into a truck wash and they see you swapping trailers, it gets their attention. Probably pay a little more attention to the way it's being washed and the way it's being disinfected, and ask some questions on how much downtime they're getting, how dry is it really, especially in the winter months when you have PD, and some of those things aren't the easiest things to wash a trailer when it's 20 below, or to get it dry and warm and everything you want it to be. So I think that's an awareness deal. We are looking at some different feed mitigation. We do use mitigation, but I think, there's multiple more products that are coming on, whether they be formaldehyde or medium chain fatty acids or whatever the case may be, to continue looking at some of those alternatives as we're going through. People traffic, obviously, or who's making touches to the farm, equipment coming in, especially repairs. Farms need repairs to be done. And it's very, very difficult to bring in equipment or bring people in and track them, and where have you been, where have your tools been, how big, all that kind of stuff to understand what your risk really is, I think is something that we need to get a better handle on, and we're making some strides in that direction.
So in Pipestone, we manage the sow farms, right? So we have a really good handle on how things function there. With our grow finish clients and customers, we provide advice and other services and veterinary services. So in terms of specific things we've implemented, that is not within our management structure, right? So, but when we do go, we have the conversations we're having in our research group meetings and in the veterinary services teams is what can we recommend when we go? And some of it boils down to basic biosecurity, like ensuring a really good, clean, dirty line. Trailers are a challenge. They go from the slaughterhouse back to the sites on, just back and forth, not always necessarily cleaned because they're considered finished hogs. And what's the risk? But the risk is spread, right? So I think a lot of it boils down to what was said earlier about maybe auditing your system. And there's always room for improvement, even in the best system, right? Like that's how we get better. There's always a world record holder, and then somebody always beats the world record, right? That's how you get better. But you only do that by evaluating your weakest points. And I think it's really important that we start to consider that we need to evaluate our biosecurity at all levels of production thoroughly, and then set new goals. And I think that's a major area of improvement we could see. Even in a respiratory virus, that doesn't mean it's the only way it's spreading. So we need to be aware of that. We can't just say, okay, it's respiratory and there's nothing I can do because I'm not filtering. That's also not the right way of looking at it.
A couple of things that would be changes a bit. Todd alluded to maintenance. If you think about being a maintenance technician and coming to our sow farms, it's brutal, right? As far as you don't know what you're there to fix. You get in there, you don't have the equipment, et cetera. So if I'm a maintenance guy doing that, I'm going to just bring all my own stuff in, right? So and it's just really hard for a farm to keep track of that. So I think that's, to me, is one of the big ones is, that guy's taking material into that farm and going to take that material to another farm. The second one that's been, I think there's fantastic data out on stage loadout, but it's been really hard to get clients to uptake that, especially in grow finish, because it's just slower, it takes more people, and we're at a time when we don't have a lot of people and slowing down, and we don't have facilities designed right, et cetera. So stage loadout, to me, both on the maintenance side and stage loadout are kind of those are pretty weak links that can get better both in grow finish as well as sow farms. On grow finish side, continue to see more PRRS vaccination with the modified live vaccines. As you think about the value of our pig and the cost of the vaccine, it really doesn't take a very high break rate in order to get a decent return on investment there. The last thing I'd say is just if you kind of think you've got all the boxes checked, just go observe. So go to the farm and participate in the loadout. Ride with the cull sow driver and go to the plant and see what it takes for them to unload cull sows. Go to the packing plant. But there's a lot of things that you kind of assume like, oh, after it's gone, it's good. I know how that works without going and observing it. So I think that's if you're kind of the end of the list, you probably just need to go work side by side with the drivers and the feed mill and those sorts of things in order to observe and understand. Okay, here's some things that I didn't know were going on.
Thank you. I know we have a question there.
Yeah, so y'all covered a little bit about PRRS elimination. Also been seeing a couple of producers that have been moving towards depop, or even producers that have been trying PRRS elimination for a while, and we know 144 is liking to linger, and then saying later, well, dang, I kind of wish I had depopped. So when you have a producer come to you, say, look, I've just broke with 144 PRRS, I'm trying to decide, should I try elimination or should I just straight up go to a depop? What conversations are y'all having with those producers?
It's a conversation we didn't have a couple years ago. So it depends a bit on the goal, right? That's one of the first things is your goal to make pigs, or is it to get the system negative? And so it depends a little bit on the system there. Depop, just got done with a project here. It was a depop and a filter and all that. The depop portion of it at this farm this last year was about $225 a sow. So I think you can probably be plus or minus $75 of that or whatever, but that gives you kind of a rough idea what that is. We find that most PRRS breaks in antibody positive herds, if you just take an average, is about $100 a sow, and that's just on the sow side, not necessarily the grow finish side. So you kind of look at that and say, okay, when your farm breaks with PRRS, you're going to take at least $100 a sow, and if it was a negative herd, then it's $300 a sow is just, again, the average. We know there's a lot of variation around there, but you're going to have that loss, and then if you want to depop, repop, that's another $225, so you're $300 a sow, and so I don't know, it's just, if it's multiplication, it's almost a no-brainer anymore. If you want to get back, that computes relatively well. Commercial farms still depends a lot on what the goals of the system are.
Yeah, I won't say much on this because this is definitely not my area of expertise, but our budget folks pointed out to us just a few weeks ago that, depop, repop can be a better way to go for some folks. And so it shouldn't be off the table, but it has to be a owner-by-owner decision and site-by-site reflection. There's got to be an economic analysis to do just that and go through what are you trying to do in the timeline and what your other debt is and what your other resources are. And sometimes it is the best option, but it does require a good just look at the economics of it for that site.
I guess I got one. Yeah, it's not an easy one. You got all the financial things that go into play, obviously. You got $100 wean pigs right now. You're going to have a gap in production. You're going to have to either purchase pigs if you got commitments on those pigs in order to do it. You have to look at gilt availability. You have to look at what your potential success rate or failure rate might be. We decided to depop one for a number of reasons. It really needed a good remodel anyway. It needed to have some work done in it. And really the parity structure of the farm wasn't real good. And so we've not depopped some farms because, man, it's a lot of young animals in there. They're doing fine. We just need to get a closure, and we'll work it out, and we'll restart it again if we have to. But it has all the pieces to be successful. But then you have to take all the other things into consideration after that and really just make your own decision.
I know we are getting closer to 2, but I know there is one last question maybe there, please. Yes.
So, okay, in the statistics, you said that in the sow farm, right, if you get hit with the PRRS, it takes about 60 weeks to get back negative, right? So what about the growers, the finishing guys? For example, they got hit here, and they have other neighbors and so forth. So how long would they take back to get back negative?
The question is about the grow finish. Would you like to address that question?
Yeah, it's a touch variable, but I would say usually we've done this, like if you're LVI and gilts and oral fluid, testing those and kind of watching them. It seems like it takes generally like 12 to 16 weeks for a group of animals to go positive or to go negative on oral fluids via PCR. That's kind of the metric that I would use.
Yeah, I would say to help, maybe in the grow finish side, we've used some vaccine because you are going to get some variation of stability of the pigs as you go on. And so you're going to go from a very high percentage of positive pigs to a very low percentage of positive pigs as you're going through. So I think there's a place maybe to use some vaccine to kind of help as the virus does spread through your grow finish and whatnot. But we would like to be, probably 7-8 months, to get to the point where we're feeling very good and getting stable on the sow farm. 60 weeks, it's a long time. It's a long time.
To your question, we have some data from the research side looking at duration of PRRS infections in wing to finish sites. And it's true, and in our study, a lot of the infections of the field virus happen in those 8 to 12, 16 weeks. And you would expect that some of those infections would have pigs come to be negative at time to go to the market, but we still find positive pigs when pigs go to the market. So it's not like it's as predictable that by default all the finishing sites will go negative. There may be less as the pigs get older, less virus cloud in some way, but unfortunately some of these sites remain positive throughout all the growing period.